Have you ever walked into a room and noticed the one person who says nothing, yet everyone watches them? That's not a coincidence. Influence doesn't always speak. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes power. We live in a time where everyone wants to be heard, talking louder, faster, more often. But the Stoics believed the opposite. The man who masters himself doesn't need to prove anything. His presence is enough. You can't control who betrays you, but you can control what happens next. Not just what you do, but who you become. Every betrayal is a mirror. It shows you what you value, what you ignore, what you tolerate. But most of all, it shows you how far you've come in mastering yourself. Because the man who lets betrayal define him is owned by others. But the one who uses it as fuel, that man becomes untouchable. This is not passivity. It's dominance through discipline. Because when you stop needing to be understood, you free yourself from the trap of explaining, defending, and seeking validation. And in that space, people lean in. They start to wonder what you're thinking. They fill in the blanks with respect. That's where real influence begins. Not from what you say, but from what you withhold. The first Stoic response to betrayal is simple but powerful. Do nothing, at least not immediately. When emotions run high, clarity runs low. And betrayal is a master manipulator of emotion. The urge to speak, to confront, to explain yourself is strong. But the Stoic holds back. Not because he's afraid, but because he knows that silence in the face of chaos is control in its purest form. By not reacting, you take back your position. You no longer operate on their terms. You stop playing defense and start building perspective. Most people betray from weakness, not strength. Insecurity, fear, self-interest. That says more about them than it ever could about you. And if you react emotionally, you hand them your dignity on a plate. You let their weakness become your downfall. There's a calmness that comes from knowing you don't have to perform. You don't need to explain your values, prove your strength, or defend your choices. When you're grounded in your own principles, your silence becomes a signal. It says, I don't need to argue. I'm already clear. I've already chosen who I am. That kind of clarity is magnetic. People don't just listen to you, they watch you. They study your stillness because they want that same composure for themselves. In silence, you reveal nothing, and that makes people uncertain. Uncertainty creates curiosity. Curiosity builds tension, and tension, when used correctly, becomes presence. That's why the silent one often controls the room without trying. Not because he demands attention, but because he doesn't chase it. He lets others reveal themselves first. He listens, he watches, he studies what others miss in their rush to be heard. This is where you reclaim power, not through revenge, but through refinement. You start focusing on your habits, your thoughts, your next moves. And suddenly, the betrayal that was meant to break you becomes your fuel. You lift, you read, you work, you rise. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that no one controls your direction but you. So instead of responding with emotion, you respond with evolution. They tried to hurt you. You used it to sharpen yourself. That's Stoic alchemy, turning pain into power without ever lowering your standards. If this is hitting you where it matters, subscribe now and hit the bell, because the strongest response is growth they never saw coming. Now let me ask you something. What's more powerful, getting even or getting better so they no longer matter at all? The third Stoic response is to observe, not personalize. Betrayal often feels like a reflection of your worth, like you did something wrong. But the Stoic separates fact from feeling. He knows that someone else's decision to betray says more about their character than your value. So instead of spiraling into shame or resentment, he studies the moment. He asks, what did this reveal? What patterns did I ignore? What blind spots can I now see? Because the Stoic uses pain as data. as feedback, not to punish himself but to improve his vision. Betrayal becomes a lesson in awareness, in boundaries, in reading people before handing over access. Not everyone who smiles is sincere. Not everyone you open up to deserves your truth. And once you've seen it clearly, there's no need for bitterness, just clarity, just a quiet correction of your path. This is how real influence is built. Not on what you show, but on what you withhold. Not on performance, but on control. You become the person who doesn't flinch, doesn't beg to be heard, doesn't rise to every challenge. And because of that, your words carry more weight when you finally speak. Because you've proven that silence is your default. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you choose when it matters most. The fourth Stoic response is to improve in silence. Most people want to show the world they're unaffected after betrayal, to post, to speak, to prove they're fine. But the Stoic doesn't perform. He rebuilds in private. His growth is not for attention, it's for alignment. Because true healing doesn't need an audience, it needs discipline. And the man who can suffer in silence without turning bitter becomes stronger than the man who always needs to be seen. When you choose silence, you also choose patience. You allow things to unfold without interference. You observe how people reveal themselves, not just through what they say, but how quickly they say it, how emotionally they respond, how much control they lose trying to be right. Meanwhile, you conserve your energy. You let others expend theirs. And by the end, you're still steady, still composed, still in control. That's why silence is a form of leadership. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that earns trust. People follow those who don't need to be followed. They listen to those who don't speak often. And when you've trained yourself to resist the urge to prove, defend, or react, you become exactly that kind of leader. The quiet presence that moves with clarity, purpose, and strength. The fifth and final Stoic response is to forgive, not to excuse what they did, but to remove its grip on your life. Carrying resentment is like dragging chains made by someone else. Every step you take while holding on to it slows your progress. The Stoic chooses to let go, not for them, but to protect his focus, his clarity, and his peace. Because the real damage isn't always in the betrayal itself. It's in how long you let it live inside your mind. You have a choice. Keep reacting like everyone else, or start living with the discipline to hold your ground. To speak less, to observe more, to be unmoved in the face of chaos, and unshaken in the presence of ego. That's what makes a man truly powerful. Not how much he says, but how little he needs to.